Welcome back to CLI's Legalpreneurs Spotlight Future 50 series. In this series, we're showcasing thought leaders and doers in legal innovation, legal tech and AI all around the world. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Beth Patterson. Beth is the founder and director of legal industry-focused tech consultancy ESP Connect and also an adjunct professor industry at UTS Faculty of Law. Beth is a legal tech guru. She has spent most of her career in law firms finding the right match between tech and legal practice, but started her career as a tech designer and programmer. So her consultancy work is kind of unique, and she brings that unique and rich background and perspective from having sat on all sides almost of the tech fence. Beth has also made a fabulous contribution. If you haven't had a chance to read it, please do, to the Thomson Reuters Institute 2023 Australia State of the Legal Market Report in association with Melbourne Law School. There was quite a lot of time devoted in that report to AI in legal, and Beth very much contributed to that. We're going to get into all of this stuff today with Beth, and we're going to explore sections of the report. Our focus in particular is what the future of AI holds for the legal industry, a big question, and we're going to dive into that and pull it apart. Thanks so much for joining me today, Beth, and a huge welcome back.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Terry.
Absolute pleasure. I wanted to kick this off by delving first a little bit into your background and history. You know, your work has taken you from the US to Australia to tech companies to law firms, now in your own consultancy. So I kind of look at your career and see you as having fingers in all pieces of the pie in the legal ecosystem. You know, law firms, corporates, tech companies, alternative legal service providers, now law schools as well. So tell us a bit about that journey and how it's brought you to your current role.
Well, Terry, it's not anything that I ever planned. Let's put it that way. So I armed with a math degree, and before tech and computer science was really a thing in the early 80s, I went to work with IBM as a programmer. So that was the first 5 years of my career, and that was in the States. And as somebody said back then, I think we did a bit of bit twiddling. It was very, very techy. And then with a sense of adventure, I applied for a Rotary Scholarship and managed to get that and studied at University of Sydney. I did a master's in computer science, and that's where I was introduced to AI. Back then, it was expert systems. Mm-hmm. From there, I had a job offer to work here for a startup at the time in the early 90s, Option Technology. Wow. And I was a knowledge engineer, and we were trying to develop risk management AI systems for banks, basically. Interesting, it was a startup. It went bust twice, not once, and ended up looking for jobs and found a knowledge engineering position at a law firm. So that was my introduction to law, and it happened to be Freehills. And I was hired to implement an expert system technology that they had bought but didn't quite know what to do with. Had a team of lawyers reporting to me, and we developed some amazing things back then. And then went on from there to Allen's, where, as you know, I spent 20 years, built the legal technology team there from, I think we had 5 people when we started, about 60 when I left, and was responsible for the legal technology for litigation, big due diligence, the innovation space. We built out a document review team and really led the digital transformation piece for Allen's. Left there in end of 2018 and started my own consultancy. And that's where I am now, ESP Connect, and really focused on strategy, product selection, implementation, and education. Coupled with that, I'm an adjunct professor industry at University of Technology, Sydney. So I do a bit on the student side as well, and have done quite a lot of work for the EDRM group on their advisory panel. So fingers in a lot of pies, as you say.
Absolutely, but really glad that the law bug got you. So,
Yes,
we've kept you in law for most of that time. That's amazing. I have to chat with you about Gen AI and legal because, with that background and where we find ourselves, particularly today towards the end of 2023, chatting about this, it seems like a good place to start. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, though, and particularly in relation to the legal services market, I wanted to roll out a whole bunch of statements for you and get your reaction to it. So these are kind of hot topic statements basically that are flying around at the moment in the legal world about Gen AI. So I'm just going to give them all to you and then you can pull out whichever ones you like. All right, here we go. Gen AI is different. It's going to impact the legal industry more significantly than other tech. It's here to stay. You need to get on board now. What are your thoughts about that?
Can I say yes to everything, Terry?
More detail required, please.
My global answer. So it's a really interesting time, and it's really too early to tell exactly what Gen AI is going to do to the legal industry or how it's going to be used. We're all, I think, in a big experiment, but I thought it might be useful to share with you some history of AI to give this a context and then talk a little bit about how it is different. So as I explained in my career story, I started with the first wave of AI, which was expert systems. And back then, we developed some amazing things. I think the first one we did was a loan agreement. And I remember presenting to the banking and finance group, and a senior partner said, "Will this replace me?" And of course, my answer was no. That was politically correct. And it turned out that was the right answer. That first wave of AI didn't take off for a whole host of reasons, one of which was it wasn't maintainable because you had to build these rule sets out. But you could do some pretty amazing things. So we saw the hype back then. So we've seen the hype in, again, the second wave, which is more recent, probably around 2015, which is, you would know, Terry, the machine learning phase of AI, which is really narrow AI. And it's done some really amazing things to save our clients lots of money and time. One particular application of that has been predictive coding. It's been super successful in the e-discovery space. And I've had a lot to do with the implementation of that. And like most tech, it's not just the tech. Whether it works or not is about the people and the process and the technology. And there's a lot that has to come together. Again, there was a lot of hype. Lawyers are going to lose their job. Do lawyers need to learn how to code? We've been through this round. But now we get to wave 3 of AI in legal, and it's Gen AI. And I do think it is different based on my experience for a range of reasons. And I'd like to pull out 4 of those for your viewers. The first is, as we all know, you can interact with it in language. That is novel, and it makes it so easy to use. So instead of a lawyer having a tech person to rely on, they can just ask questions and get answers in the English language. Amazing. It's creative, and its breadth of application, we're still trying to get our heads around. I like to describe it as a bit of an octopus. It's got tentacles everywhere. And really, the market's trying to figure out the things it can do. For example, for legal, some of the things that I think will be quite beneficial to the market if we can get them to work well. It can find and extract information. It can summarize things. You can use it for review and synthesis of documents. That's particularly useful, obviously, in an e-discovery context or due diligence context. And it can draft things or create things. It's really one of the first technologies that I've seen that has that creative piece. It can write poems. It can do first drafts. And people are really talking about it as what a junior lawyer may be capable of. The third point is availability. So Microsoft, as you know, has just integrated it into their Office 365 Enterprise Suite. It's being upgraded as we speak. And Copilot's going to be on most enterprise desktops. What it will actually do, we're still learning, but it's going to be able to do things like summarize meetings. If you record them, you can get summaries, etc. So the fact that it's going to be integrated with the applications that are on everyone's desktop is unique. The fourth point is the pace of change is absolutely extraordinary. When it was launched in November last year, the actual uptake was 1 million users in 1 week, the fastest uptake of any technology ever. But again, it's like we're in a big experiment. McKinsey, for example, has said that it has the potential impact of $2.6 to $4.4 trillion annually. It could add that to the global economy. So there's some big stats being thrown around. But Terry, I think I've been around a while. I've seen a lot of hype, and my experience is the reality will be something probably quite different. But we're in the top of the Gartner hype cycle.
Yeah.
So those are some of the interesting points. I think it's important also then to understand that there's still some major issues with this technology. And if I can, I'll just talk you through a few of them that I think are quite significant. As I said, I think we're in a bit of an experiment. I've never seen a technology released that didn't work fully, and people might argue with me about that. But it does something called hallucinate. And in the old days, they would have called that a bug or a problem with the technology. In this day and age, it's a hallucination, and that's just the way it works. And I think everyone's still grappling with, well, how can you use it if it makes stuff up? And there's a lot of work being done right now in that area. And there's some techniques being used that make that a lot better. But no one yet can prove that the techniques they're using makes it not hallucinate. So that's a big issue. In fact, there was something in the news this week. There was a parliamentary submission by a group of academics, and it was with regards to professional services firms, and it made things up, and they submitted it, and they made a public apology. In the legal industry, we've had in the US someone submit a court document that had citations that were made up, and they got sanctioned, basically. So hallucinations are a big deal. Secondly, no one really knows how it works. I find this amazing. Sam Altman, who you would know, one of the founders of OpenAI, that has written ChatGPT, he was in Australia earlier this year and said that the founders don't know how it really works. Now, we know that it generates the next best word or the next most likely word. And obviously, the technologists know the algorithms they've programmed, but nobody really knows how it gets to the right answer. And so in law, one of the issues is you need to be really transparent. And there's a real lack of transparency. So that's an issue for law. The other thing I'd say there is there's a lot of work being done around that. And finally, there's a huge range of regulatory and legal issues. So there are court cases in the US right now challenging the training data and the copyright around the training data. There's issues of bias, privacy, security. And so this is going to play out, and we really are in the early stages of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you a follow-up question, though. It's almost like a bit of a temperature gauge. Are you excited by Gen AI?
I'd say I'm excited and scared.
Very honest.
In the legal industry, there's a lot riding on getting things correct. And one of the reasons I probably stayed in it so long is I enjoy that challenge. You can't do things halfway. There's such big risks for your clients. And so I find it challenging to get my head around this technology and that it's quite different than anything we've seen to date. But I do think it's exciting in terms of its potential.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to jump into chatting about legal service providers and Gen AI and probably, I guess, keep this at a fairly high level. But we talk kind of a lot about the traditional duopoly, law firms and in-house lawyers, lots of other stakeholders, and obviously we can't cover them all today. But I'd love to get your thoughts on what some of the key players are doing right now with Gen AI. And by that, I'm thinking about law firms, corporates, tech companies, and any others that you'd kind of like to pop into that, to kind of get a feel for what they're doing individually, and I guess what that means in a way collectively in terms of, to the extent that they influence the legal services market and its application or use of Gen AI.
Sure. So at a really high level, I like to say we're in that phase of testing and investing.
Yeah.
So people it's so new that they're really trying to understand what it can do. There's lots of experimentation going on. We're starting to see some announcements. But one of the most interesting things I find is that this tech is being driven by the top, by the CEO, by the managing partners, by the boards. And it is so novel and has such potential that they have a fear of missing out.
Yeah.
Where the tech people, the ones who are implementing it and trying to understand it, the CTOs, the CIOs, etc. I heard a term that I think is quite interesting. They have JOMO, which is the joy of missing out, because as I've said, there are so many different issues, and it's such a different kind of technology that we're trying to get our heads around. But in terms of the three sort of cohorts that you mentioned, first of all, law firms. So as you noted, I helped write the Thomson Reuters 2023 State of the Legal Market Report. And in that, we quoted some stats from the Thomson Reuters Tech and Law Survey 2023. And the top three law firm priorities are: 1, attract and retain talent; 2, accelerate digital transformation; and 3, enhance cybersecurity resilience and data protection, all of which are relevant to digital, the last two being digital. And the first, I firmly believe that law firms have to invest to attract the right talent. I don't think you're going to get junior lawyers walking in the door. And I do a lot of work with law students. One of their biggest interests is, how is technology going to change our profession? And they want to see forward-thinking law firms. 60% of the law firms surveyed said that they think their tech investment will increase significantly or moderately. So there's a lot of money being put into tech. And one of the other interesting stats that came out of that is that larger firms are more likely to either currently be using Gen AI or have a desire to adopt it. So 62% of the firms surveyed were in that category, where mid-tiers were around 43% and boutiques were around 38%. So we're seeing, a bit of a push from the larger end of town. And I do think the mid-tier boutique will follow as well. So what are Australian law firms doing? We've had the announcement from Allens with Airly, where they've implemented their own version of a chat GPT. And we heard on your fantastic CLI conference on Gen AI last week from quite a lot of the players. And really, they're very much experimenting and starting to look at what applications they might build with Gen AI. And a lot of that experimentation, I think one of the important points is it's both bottom up and top down and pervasive across the organization, which again is quite different than what we've seen with other technologies. On the corporate side, some of the major corporates that I do work with have the enterprise Gen AI project going on.
Yeah.
And then legal is looking at what they might piggyback off of or may need to do themselves. And they're looking from guidance, as we all are. We're sort of all in this experiment together. But their top 3 priorities in the Tech and Law survey from Thomson Reuters 2023. The first was standardizing their legal ops with technology. Second was managing and mitigating data compliance risk. And third was unlocking business opportunities with strategic legal guidance. Now, all of those involve technology. 61% of the corporates surveyed said that they are either actively using Gen AI, training teams in using Gen AI, or experimenting. That's a big percentage. So I think, again, because it's being driven top down, it's not like you have to fight for the dollars to be in this game.
That comparison, Beth, to me is also really interesting because, if the clients are kind of in there working with Gen AI to this extent, then it stands to reason that their legal advisors at the very least have to be doing the same, Absolutely. If not a bit more, right?
Absolutely. And, the million-dollar question is, what will the clients be able to do themselves?
Yeah. So
what they currently outsource may they be able to do using Gen AI? One example I've heard thrown around is, a potential case comes in and sometimes they outsource, give me a summary of where I might stand. They might be able to use a Gen AI platform trained with their own data to get that first cut answer. There's all kinds of potential applications. Yeah. So the third cohort, Terry, are the tech companies and ALSPs. And I think about them in a couple categories. The first are existing legal tech providers. And what we're seeing is a real investment in how they will integrate Gen AI into their products. And we're starting to see announcements. We've had Relativity announce AIR will be released in 2024. A couple other players in the e-discovery space, Disco's already announced that they have something in their product. Another really interesting product is Merlin, which is just announced their Gen AI solution. And then on the contract side, we have lots of companies in terms of drafting contracts, reviewing contracts. One of those is Spellbook. So we're seeing a real push for existing players to get on board with Gen AI. And I think that will definitely happen. And then we're seeing new products. And those new products, interestingly, may be developed by existing players, or Thomson Reuters, for example, bought CoCounsel this year, a Gen AI product that has huge potential. And everybody's sort of waiting to see where that will land. And one of the interesting discussions I'm hearing in the market is with some of these new products, will it overtake some of the existing legal technology? And again, nobody knows yet, but it's an interesting discussion.
But they're important things and developments to know that are going on, because I guess, there is that possibility of tech washing, isn't there? A little bit like, yes. For environmental matters, we have greenwashing, but we've got tech washing where people are saying that they're doing things maybe as providers, law firms or legal departments are saying that they're doing things, but the more everyone upskills in this, the more questions that they'll ask and the less likelihood that that can happen. And I think the time period is very small. In other words, I don't think you're going to get away with not knowing what you're doing or being able to answer those questions. If you should ever, you're certainly not going to get away with it for long. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. I think players are figuring out what it can and can't do. And because it is so different, I've heard everything from it's not going to work. It'll take a year before people figure out that this isn't going to be as precise enough for legal. They don't have to be able to do some things, but the hard stuff it probably won't. And there are actually other types of large language models, not Gen AI, but other ones that have been around and are being used and do things in a more precise way, but you can't interact with them in English language. Yes. So I think we're actually going to end up seeing a combination of technologies. I've already seen a product, for example, where it will use Gen AI to do document summaries, but then it will cross-check it with one of the Generation 2 AI technologies, predictive coding, which is proven and, courts accept it. So I think you're going to see combinations of technologies being used.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Let me jump into a bit of crystal ball gazing with you next and ask you, I'm going to call it in the Gen AI tsunami that is going on at the moment. How do you, or what do you think is next? And it's so hard in asking this question to give you a time period to fix that with, whether it's 3 months or 6 months or 12 months. So I'm going to say to you, choose your own time period. But what do you see kind of coming down the pipeline that we should really be paying attention to? What's next?
Great question, Terry. I wish I was a wizard and my crystal ball worked perfectly. But I take the 12-month time frame.
Okay.
And I think I take that because I think in 12 months, we will have more certainty as what it will be good at and what it won't be good at. I think that with Microsoft releasing Copilot, I think there are going to be a whole host of enterprise-wide applications that are going to be really useful and helpful in the day-to-day. But again, treating it like a junior lawyer, the work will always need to be reviewed because of some of the issues that I spoke about earlier. So I think in a 12 months' time, we will see some really interesting applications out of the Copilot. And then I think a lot of the existing legal tech products will have integrations that will actually be quite beneficial to do some of the bulk work. I mean, I lived through the predictive coding tsunami, and we were all so astounded at what it could do, and then we didn't believe it, and then we finally, the second iteration, it became, interestingly, part of the way lawyers already worked. When you have technologies that you ask lawyers to work differently, they're much more difficult to implement. If they're in the mainstream of how they currently work, they're easier in terms of adoption. So I do think we will see some useful application of it. And I do think we may see some deck chairs sliding around as well.
Is it almost, and I really hesitate to use this word because I don't know that it's the right one, but is it almost a bit of a consolidation in the next 12 months? And by that, I don't mean that there's not going to be new products and new things happening and a whole bunch of continued buzz in the market, but more to go to your point that the focus is going to be on the use cases. The focus is going to be on the integration and whether we can actually now have this as part of the business as usual for us.
I think so, but I think one of the interesting areas of development are the large language models themselves.
Yeah, okay.
So there's an evolution just of the underlying large language model. And an example, there are a group of 7 ex-OpenAI development team, senior executives that have started a company called Anthropic. They now have a large language model called Claude. It's a different approach. And I just think the large language model space is so new and novel. That evolution will also drive the legal stack on top of it. So I just think it's really too new to tell.
Yeah.
I think there's sort of, I was thinking about this, sort of three things that people don't talk about too much in terms of where we are at in the market that I think are important. One is just the commercials, the commercial drivers. And in my experience, the commercials will drive adoption. You can have the best technology in the world, but if it's out of reach in terms of price, you won't get so much adoption. And what I'm starting to see is some products talking about being model agnostic.
Okay.
Where they allow you to plug in different models, and you might use a less expensive model to do some of the big bulk work because they typically you get charged by volume, and then use some of the more pointy, refined models to do some of the smaller work. So I think the commercial arrangements will drive how they get used. I think that's a really important a point. The second is that the models have different, quote, personalities. And one of the expertises that we're all going to need to carry across the board is which models are good at what.
Yeah.
And that's quite a different proposition than we've ever seen. And then finally, as I spoke about earlier, I do think the integration with other technologies and how that is done will drive adoption, because I don't think Gen AI just on its own is going to solve, the whole problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of, as you said, it's part of the stack, isn't it, at the end of the day? However you define stack, by the way. I know that comes out in lots of different ways. I wanted to wrap up by asking you this question, and again, kind of staying at that high level, but this time to focus it on law firm leaders, or indeed leaders of legal departments for that reason, and just looking ahead to next year. So staying within that 12 months. So in 2024, it's going to be here before we know it. And, the work that you're doing, particularly through your consultancy, I just wanted to get your thoughts about what you expect to get to the top of the agenda, maybe what needs to be at the top of the agenda, or the top priorities for our legal leaders in 2024.
Sure. So if I had a client come to me and say, I'm not doing anything with Gen AI, what should I do? I'd give them a list of 6 or 7 things, which are actually in the Thomson Reuters State of the Legal Market report. So you can download that and refer to it. Yep. But the first is just education, Terry. And you guys at CLI have done an amazing job in helping our industry through your initiatives, like the conference last week. And we're all learning, and we need to learn from each other. And while we might be competitors as well, I just think it's really important, the education piece, and coupled with that, the experimentation. Yeah. And I think the experimentation needs to be across your organization. And it, like within a law firm, it's not just the lawyers, it's also the business side. Basically, Gen AI can code, it can write code. So your tech team is probably already using it. Yeah. But it's across the organization that experimentation should happen. So that's number one. 2 is, once you've done that, you need to think about the strategy. What are you trying to achieve? And it may be as simple as, I want to build my expertise and be prepared for when this stuff is more proven. And I need to build my Gen AI muscle. And I think that is actually really important. Third would be to actually test the models. As I discussed, different commercials different personalities, good at different things, and we're going to see more and more models on the market. And I think you need to build that model expertise either within your organization or have a third party that you trust. Fourth is the tech stack. So whether you buy or build is going to be a big question. But either way, you need to get your tech stack in order. You need to make sure you've got good cyber, obviously, in the world that we live in today. That's very important. Cloud computing, you need to make sure, we've watched that cloud technology really overtake how we used to do things, but it was a long and has been a long journey. And data governance, how you keep your data, where is your data? Those are super important things that you just need to do in order to be prepared for the Gen AI. The fifth is your own data and what I like to term as data sophistication. Basically, your own data is going to be the secret sauce that drives success within these Gen AI products, because what people are going to be doing is combining their data with the large language models to get solutions. And so a lot of organizations haven't really even turned their mind to the data problem. But we've heard the term for a long time, data is the new oil. But in the Gen AI world, it's even more than the new oil.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the training. So I get asked a lot, what skills should we be building for our lawyers, for our corporate services side of the business? There are probably 4 key skills for the lawyers. Just general digital literacy. I think we still have a long way to go. And I know there's some firms that are doing some great things around digital literacy. Model expertise that we've spoken about. How to ask the right questions. So as you know, there's a term being used for a role called prompt engineering. Well, all lawyers may need to be prompt engineers. So the way you ask questions to large language models will determine how good or bad the results are. And so there's expertise in that. And finally, just judgment, which lawyers are really good at. But your judgment in terms of the results and whether they're correct or not is going to be absolutely critical. And finally, the last point is there will be legal opportunities. So especially for law firms, there are going to be whole new areas of law being developed in IP, copyright, technology, security, et cetera. So there's some real opportunities in terms of developing your legal nous to be able to advise your clients.
So let me come full circle and get your thoughts on this one final question that I wanted to ask you. We kind of started by looking at the technology and exploring it and identifying certainly some challenges with it, but as you've just ended here with a whole bunch of opportunities as well, it's not going to happen overnight, and there is a lot of work to be done. But as you look at Gen AI for legal today, are you optimistic about it versus pessimistic about it? And I think it's a different question than the one I asked you earlier about being excited or not. It's almost like, do you see that there's more opportunity than challenges?
Yeah, I would say more or less, but I would say I'm optimistic that it's going to be able to do some very novel things.
Yeah.
I think I'm optimistic that it will affect the way roles work. I mean, an example, on the student side, instead of students writing essays, they're being asked to critique essays that have been written by ChatGPT. That's what students are starting to do.
Yeah, sure.
Clearly, they're trying to prepare the law students for the next phase. And, again, as I've been involved in and watched the generations of AI particularly, I have seen roles change. In that second generation of AI, people in the market don't talk about it a lot, but it really has changed the nature of the way we practice litigation and investigations. And not all of them can use it, but a large number can.
Yeah.
And when it is used, it's required less big teams of lawyers, more multidisciplinary skill sets, and much richer understanding of what the technology can do and the risks involved. And so I think we'll see, again, the need to be able to work with different skill sets, technology, project management, legal, model experts. It's a bit of a different game. So I think overall I'd say optimistic.
Yeah. It's as you describe it, I couldn't help but think, what an amazing, rich, diverse opportunity in terms of careers and where all of this could take us. So, I'm a self-proclaimed Gen AI enthusiast, and it sounds like you might be too. So, Beth, just been absolutely amazing and fascinating discussion with you. Thank you so much. And I think I need to check back in with you again within that 12-month period and see how we've gone. And I know that I will very much look forward to that. So thank you very much again.
Thank you for the opportunity, Terry. And you can rate my crystal ball in 12 months' time.
Thanks, Beth.